Trump comes in and disengages from NATO, then we're into really dangerous territory. And not least, of course, because the impact on the Ukraine war, if Trump pulls all American aid out of Ukraine, that leaves two alternatives. Either Ukraine goes it alone or Europe steps up to the mark. So this election year is going to be of critical importance. Despite all the challenges it faces, NATO remains the most successful alliance the world has seen. It's going to be 75 years old this year. And it absolutely has a future. The purpose of NATO is to protect, defend the land borders, the airspace and the sea lines of communications of the member states who make it up, which is effectively what's known as the transatlantic region. And it faces a real challenge. The first challenge, the wolf nearest the sledge, of course, is the reality of Russia and the threat Russia poses. And I think we have to recognize that Russia is not going to go away as a threat. Putin has made it very clear that he wants to eliminate Ukraine. And he is also the man who said the most appropriate security settlement for Europe is a new Yalta. Well, of course, the old Yalta saw the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, who then ended up in the Warsaw Pact, effectively colonized by Russia. So you can imagine the impact of that on our friends in Central and Eastern Europe, almost all of whom are now NATO members. So NATO's task for the future, and it's a generational challenge, is to protect the transatlantic area by effective military deterrence. And that's the only way that we will see peace in the transatlantic region for a generation, if not several generations to come, until and unless Russia becomes a responsible member of the international community. And that's not going to happen anytime soon. NATO's task for the long term is to protect the transatlantic region. Well, Strategia is our focus is risk execution, which means understanding risk and building resilience. And everything we do, or much of what we do, our DNA, is derived, certainly in my case, from my 37 years of soldiering. So what is it about? It's about leadership. It's about strategic leadership, which means understanding the complexities, or seeking to understand the complexities of the world, understanding the relationships between risk, setting a clear strategic leadership as well, setting a clear strategy and the means and the ways to achieve that strategy. But also resilience, I think, is imperative, because nobody can tell the future, and however sophisticated your risk management techniques might be, and just on that, it's not just about looking at risk in silos, it's about understanding the relationship between risks. But you've also got to aim off for the unexpected, because that's inevitably what's going to happen. And you only need to look at the complexities of the geopolitical world we live in at the moment. So building resilience is essential. And there are two aspects there that I've absolutely derived from mine and others' military experience, which is wargaming to test strategic resilience, and crisis management, training, exercising based on sound crisis management and plans. And those organizations who don't think through resilience will get caught out. So that's very much what we can do in the Strategia sort of capability. Well, China is the economic elephant in the room. China's going through some economic tough times at the moment, but it's also emerged as a real challenge in the Asia-Pacific region. President Xi and the Chinese have espoused effectively a form of militant nationalism. Flag waving, the Belt and Road project, which many see as a form of advancing Chinese power across the world through what's colloquially known as debt trap diplomacy, establishing major infrastructure projects and then getting countries into all sorts of problems, which allow China to extend its tentacles. And of course, the real concern is that China has said, President Xi has said, that Taiwan has got to become back part of the overall Chinese sovereignty. And if there was any form of war in Taiwan, this would be a global catastrophe. But it would also be a Chinese catastrophe, a Chinese economic catastrophe. So China will exert considerable power, economic, political, diplomatic. China exerts significant power in the global south. You only have to look at the conferences for African leaders that Xi has run, summoning African leaders from right around the continent to Beijing to get the word according to Xi. And I've spent a bit of time recently in sub-Saharan Africa, in both Kenya and in Zimbabwe, and the Chinese influence in those two countries, as in many other African countries, is very, very marked. And of course, the other big picture point is that the sun is, in a sense, setting on Europe and the West, and rising in the East. Economic power, the share of global GDP is moving inexorably in the direction of the East, and that means that China will continue to be a big player. Now, a word of caution, though, that doesn't mean to say that China is necessarily going to supplant the United States as the #1 global power. I don't think that's going to happen in the next 10 years, not least because of the challenges of that are facing the Chinese economy at the moment. But despite those challenges, I think we all have to really take account of what China is doing and saying, not least, of course, in the context of the Ukraine-Russia war, because China is benefiting from that. And Xi will continue to exert influence over Putin. Well, I think there is now at last a recognition that geopolitics really matters. We live in an exceptionally dangerous world, and that world is only going to get more dangerous. It's, every year the challenges ramp up. I've talked about the existential threat Russia poses to the NATO alliance through what it's doing in Ukraine. I think the so what for businesses is two things. One is to understand what's going on, and the second one is to build resilience. Understanding what's going on means, in my view, that any business has got to have and build a capability for understanding geopolitical risk, almost like a sort of inbuilt intelligence cell, scanning constantly so that as events take place or as trends emerge, it gets onto the business radar screen and then can then be translated into effective risk management strategies and mitigations. And I think that requires businesses, either if they're big enough to build their own intelligence analysis capability in-house, or if they're not big enough to do it on their own, to import it. And that's something that can easily be done through contracting out, etc., because there are many organizations that can do that. The second area, and I've sort of touched on it with what, in your question about Strategia, is resilience. As I said earlier, nobody can foretell the future. And the events of the last few years, the pandemic, war in Ukraine, and the challenges, and it's not just Ukraine, the challenges of the Sahel, for example, pretty well anywhere in the world, require businesses to aim off for the unexpected. Yes, understanding risk. Yes, to designing strategies to managing risk. But absolutely the importance of building resilience through wargaming, through crisis management exercising, and making sure that crisis management policies and plans are properly practiced, properly understood, so that when the crisis happens, businesses can respond with speed and agility. And of course, you build resilience. Risk, as much as anything, the flip side of risk is opportunity. And that, of course, is what businesses need to be looking for, is opportunities. But you won't do it unless you know what's going on. Well, my my real focus has been as a result of the Eastern Europe and the Ukraine-Russia war. How do you navigate? And of course, it's understanding everything. You navigate by doing all the sorts of things I was talking earlier about. I'm trying to understand what's going on by reading widely, by listening, and by talking widely to a whole range of people with specifics. And of course, it also helps to have a network which is able to, one can draw on to answer specific questions for specific issues and understanding. I work on the basis that nobody can be an expert in everything. Try and be an expert in everything and you'll be an expert in nothing. My focus, and inevitably as a result of writing a book in 2016, which forecasting war with Russia, has become de facto what's been going on in Ukraine. But I can draw on an extensive network for support and expertise in areas like China, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Sahel, and other parts of the world. I think they're absolutely critical. Firstly, the UK is one of very few European countries where the defense budget has not gone up in any shape or size since the start of the Ukraine war. Germany will spend over 2% of GDP on defense this year, and it is likely to increase next year. Poland is now spending 4% of GDP on defense, and as you would expect, the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, are also really upping their defense spending, as are a range of other European countries. Britain, I believe, has shown extraordinary complacency. I think it has sat back on its laurels, and this government has said, yeah, we were the first in to support Ukraine, which is true, and credit where credit is due. But it hasn't recognized yet the real risks involved, and the fact that if Ukraine is to achieve a decisive result, a victory over Russia, and that is by no means a given. In fact, Ukraine right now is on the back foot. The West has got to dig deep. It has got to mobilize its economies. It has got to put itself effectively on a war economy footing, not just in order to produce the military capability, but frankly to grow the GDP in order to be able to afford to do it. So this year's election in the UK is absolutely critical, and I think the government, there must be a very high probability of a Labour victory, and I would hope that Labour will absolutely take advantage and recognise the very real threats this country faces and do something about it. And actually, ironically, traditionally, Labour has been rather better and rather stronger on defence than the Tories. And I'm not saying that in any party political sense. That's just, as a non-political soldier, that is what I would observe from the time I've spent soldiering. America, well, this is the critical one. Trump has said that he would end the war in 24 hours. Trump has said that he would encourage Russia to attack a NATO member that wasn't paying what it should be paying into the alliance. Well, that is extraordinarily dangerous, inflammatory talk. It is opening the door to Putin. So if Trump gets in, I think we are in a really dangerous place. And he will disconnect America from European security. I don't think he'll take America out of NATO. But I think under Trump, America will become a sleeping partner and really do the absolute minimum within the alliance. And that places a real imperative on European countries, Britain, Germany, France, particularly the big ones in Europe, together with Italy, Spain and others, to step up to the mark in ways they haven't simply stepped up to the mark in years, not since the days of the Cold War. But the alliance has always been dependent on America. And if Trump comes in and disengages from NATO, then we're into really dangerous territory. And not least, of course, because the impact on the Ukraine war, if Trump pulls all American aid out of Ukraine, that leaves two alternatives. Either Ukraine goes it alone or Europe steps up to the mark. So this election year is going to be of critical importance. I think build resilience and keep something in reserve would be my advice. And of course, building resilience, as I said earlier, is about thinking strategically. It's about putting together a strategy, and it's about testing that strategy, because strategies will invariably, the circumstances in which strategy is designed will almost change. And when it changes, what do you need? You need a reserve. You need something to allow you to cope with the unexpected. It's a basic military axiom to always have something in reserve. And once you've committed that reserve, you then start thinking about how you can regenerate another reserve. So build resilience and have something in reserve.